There's a moment in life that a lot of people go through, but very few know how to actually explain clearly. Nothing has necessarily gone wrong at all. Your life might look almost exactly the same from the outside looking in. You wake up in the same room, follow the same routine, talk to the same people, and keep carrying the same responsibilities you always have. And yet somewhere deep inside, something feels genuinely different now. You start to feel like the life you've been living isn't quite large enough anymore for the person you're steadily becoming. At first, this feeling might show up as simple restlessness. You might lose interest in things that used to occupy your mind completely. Conversations that once excited you might suddenly feel oddly empty. Places that once felt familiar might start feeling strangely distant instead. You might even catch yourself asking questions you never used to ask before. Is this really what I want? Am I still the same person I was even a year ago? Why do I feel like something's missing when nothing's obviously wrong on the surface? These particular questions can feel uncomfortable because the conscious mind generally prefers certainty over ambiguity. It wants clear explanations. It wants to know exactly what's happening, where life is heading, and what comes next. But the deeper layers of the mind don't always communicate through clear, tidy explanations. Sometimes they speak instead through a feeling, a repeated thought, a dream you simply can't forget, a strange pull towards something new, or an unexplained desire to leave behind a life that once seemed perfectly fine. This is very often where real transformation begins. Not with some announcement, not with a dramatic event, but with a quiet inner realization that you can no longer keep pretending to be satisfied with something that's already become too small for who you are. The important thing to understand here is that this restlessness doesn't always mean you should immediately tear your life apart and run towards something completely unknown. It might mean something considerably deeper instead. It might be revealing that your inner world has already started moving ahead of your outer circumstances. Some part of you may already be changing before the rest of your life has had time to reflect that change back to you. This is exactly why you can sometimes feel like something's coming, even when you have absolutely no logical evidence to support that feeling. You might not know what the future actually holds, but something inside you has already started recognizing that the present simply can't stay exactly as it currently is. The unconscious mind often works quietly beneath the surface the whole time. While your conscious attention stays focused on daily problems, the deeper psyche keeps observing, connecting, remembering, and preparing behind the scenes. It notices patterns you tend to ignore. It stores emotions you never fully processed at the time. It recognizes when an old identity is starting to weaken from the inside. And sometimes, before a new experience actually enters your life, the person you've been has to start loosening its grip on you first. This can feel like confusion at times. You might wonder why you're suddenly more sensitive to certain people, certain environments, certain conversations than you used to be. You might notice you're no longer willing to tolerate what you once simply accepted without question. You might feel pulled toward learning something new, changing direction, or spending more time alone than usual. You might even feel a strange mix of excitement and fear together, as though you're standing at the edge of something you can't quite see yet. Don't dismiss this too quickly. The unknown often feels frightening, not necessarily because it's actually dangerous, but because it hasn't been given a name yet, and whatever has no name can easily get mistaken for emptiness instead. Maybe you think nothing's happening simply because the opportunity hasn't appeared yet. Maybe you believe your life is standing still because the answer hasn't arrived yet either. But there are seasons where the most important movement is happening entirely inside you. A seed doesn't look anything like a tree while it's actually changing underground. In the same way, your next chapter may begin long before there's any visible evidence of it on the surface. This is where the idea of meaningful coincidence starts to matter. Not as some promise that every coincidence has a supernatural explanation behind it, but as an invitation to pay attention to the relationship between your inner development and the events that start appearing around you. Sometimes, as your inner world changes, you start noticing possibilities that were always present, but simply invisible to the person you used to be. The door didn't suddenly appear out of nowhere. You may have simply become capable of finally seeing it, and this is exactly why something unexpected can enter your life precisely at the moment you stop forcing the old version of your life to keep continuing. A new relationship, an unexpected opportunity, a powerful realization, or even a sudden ending might become meaningful because it meets a person who is no longer the same on the inside. So if you've recently felt like your old life isn't quite enough anymore, don't immediately assume you're lost. Maybe you're being asked instead to become more honest with yourself. Maybe the discomfort is showing you exactly where you've outgrown yourself. Maybe the emptiness isn't the end of something meaningful at all, but the space quietly being created for something you can't fully recognize yet. Because before life brings something unexpected into your world, it very often starts by making the familiar impossible to keep ignoring. And sometimes the very first sign that something new is approaching is simply this. You can no longer convince yourself that you're meant to stay exactly where you currently are. And once you begin recognizing that something inside you is changing, another question naturally follows right behind it. What is this change actually preparing me for? The difficulty here is that the unconscious mind rarely gives you a complete, tidy answer all at once. It doesn't usually show you the entire road ahead in one clean picture. Instead, it gives you fragments instead. A feeling that keeps returning again and again. A dream that stays with you long after you've woken up. A symbol that suddenly seems to appear everywhere you look. A memory you thought you'd already forgotten. A desire that seems to come from absolutely nowhere. You might not understand the meaning right away, but that doesn't mean there's no meaning hiding inside what you're experiencing. The deeper mind often speaks through images, emotions, patterns, and symbols, because these are the languages that existed long before we ever learned to explain everything through words alone. A dream might show you a house, a door, a journey, a stranger, or an entire landscape. On the surface, these might look like meaningless images, but psychologically, they may reflect something actively happening within you instead. The house might represent the structure of your inner life. A locked room might represent a part of yourself you've been avoiding. The journey might represent movement away from an old identity you're outgrowing. The stranger might represent a quality within you that you haven't fully recognized yet. And sometimes the symbol appearing in your inner world starts echoing through your outer world too. You hear the same phrase repeatedly. You encounter the same idea in unexpected places. You suddenly become interested in something you'd previously ignored completely. You meet someone who seems to wake up a part of you that had been quietly asleep for years. This doesn't mean every coincidence is some message written specifically for you personally. But it does mean that your attention isn't random at all. What you notice is very often connected to what's becoming psychologically important within you at that time. Before a major transformation becomes visible in your outer life, the unconscious may already be preparing you by changing what you actually notice. You might suddenly start recognizing patterns in your relationships you once completely overlooked. You might become aware of the emotional cost behind certain choices you've made. You might start questioning beliefs that once controlled your entire life without you even realizing it. And this process can genuinely feel unsettling because awareness very often arrives before action does. You can see what's wrong before you know exactly how to change it. You can feel that you've outgrown something before you know what will actually replace it. You can sense you're moving toward a new chapter while still standing somewhere in the final pages of the old one. This is the strange psychological in-between space between identities. The person you were is becoming considerably less convincing, but the person you're becoming hasn't fully arrived yet either. A lot of people mistake this particular period for outright failure. They say things like, I don't know what I want anymore. They believe they are genuinely lost because the old answers no longer satisfy them the way they used to. But sometimes losing an old answer is actually the beginning of asking a considerably more honest question instead. The unconscious isn't always trying to hand you certainty. Sometimes it's trying instead to make you conscious of something. And becoming conscious means discovering that many of your choices were never truly your own to begin with. Maybe you chose a certain career because you wanted approval from someone. Maybe you stayed in a relationship because you were afraid of being alone. Maybe you adopted an entire identity because your family, your community, or your circumstances told you who you were supposed to become. And then one day, something inside you starts to resist all of that quietly, not necessarily loudly at first. Maybe you just feel tired in a way sleep can't fix anymore. Maybe you start dreaming about freedom you can't quite name. Maybe you find yourself returning to an old passion you abandoned years earlier. Maybe a quiet voice inside you keeps asking, what would my life actually look like if I stopped living according to everyone else's expectations of me? These particular questions aren't always comfortable, but they can be genuinely important because the unconscious very often begins preparing you for a new experience by revealing the truth about the old one first. It shows you exactly what you've been avoiding. It brings forgotten emotions back up to the surface. It exposes patterns that have quietly repeated themselves through different people and different circumstances over time. And sometimes what feels like a sudden crisis is actually the exact moment when something hidden simply can't remain hidden any longer. This is exactly why the unexpected may only enter your life after you've gone through a period of real inner confusion first. You might think the confusion is delaying your future somehow, but perhaps it's actually clearing away the illusions that would have prevented you from recognizing it when it finally arrives. Imagine someone who spent years believing that love has to be earned through sacrifice. Then, slowly, they start seeing the pattern clearly for the first time. They recognize how often they've abandoned themselves just to keep someone else close by. At first, this awareness might feel genuinely painful, but it also creates an entirely new possibility. The next relationship they enter won't be approached by the same person as before. The outer experience can change precisely because the inner pattern has already changed first. This is the deeper preparation most people never actually see happening. The unconscious isn't necessarily showing you exactly what will happen next in your life. It may simply be preparing you instead to meet whatever comes next with considerably greater awareness. And that's far more valuable than receiving some perfect prediction, because the future can bring an opportunity into your life, but only your own inner development determines whether you're able to actually recognize it, accept it, and respond to it wisely when it finally shows up. So pay attention to whatever keeps returning to you. The thought you can't completely dismiss. The dream that touches something considerably deeper than pure logic. The feeling that appears before you even understand its cause. The symbol that seems to follow you through different moments of your life. Don't become obsessed with decoding every single detail perfectly. Simply become more attentive instead. Your inner world may be moving toward a truth your conscious mind hasn't yet learned how to properly express. And once you finally understand what it's been preparing you to see, you may realize that the unexpected was never quite as sudden as it originally seemed. And perhaps this is exactly where the mystery becomes even more interesting. Because the unexpected rarely enters your life through the door you've been staring at the whole time. You may spend years waiting for one specific opportunity, one particular person, one exact outcome you've imagined clearly. You picture what your future has to look like. And because you've created such a vivid picture in your mind already, you become blind to the possibilities that don't match that picture at all. You're looking for one specific door, but life may be quietly opening an entirely different one instead. This is one of the reasons unexpected experiences can carry so much power. They don't always arrive in the exact form you were prepared to receive them in. Sometimes the opportunity shows up as a conversation you almost avoided entirely. Sometimes a new direction begins with a disappointment you didn't want. Sometimes an ending creates the exact space for a beginning you never could have planned yourself. And sometimes the very thing you initially reject becomes the exact thing that changes your entire understanding of yourself. This is exactly why the unconscious mind can be so difficult to understand sometimes. The conscious mind is constantly making plans of its own. It creates expectations. It decides what success is supposed to look like, what love is supposed to feel like, what the future is supposed to contain. Exactly. But the deeper psyche isn't always interested in preserving the image you've carefully created for yourself. It's interested instead in bringing you closer to real wholeness. And the path toward wholeness doesn't always look like the path toward comfort, unfortunately. There are moments when life seems to interrupt your careful plans for no obvious reason at all. A person enters your world unexpectedly. A job opportunity appears from a completely unlikely direction. A conversation changes the way you see an old problem you'd been stuck on. A rejection forces you to reconsider a goal you believed you couldn't live without. At first, you might see these events as pure random interruptions. Later, you may understand instead that they redirected your attention towards something you'd been unable to see clearly before. This is exactly where meaningful coincidence becomes psychologically significant. A coincidence can matter not because we need to immediately declare it some supernatural sign, but because of the meaning it awakens quietly within us instead. Two events might be objectively unrelated to each other, and yet their timing might cause something inside you to shift regardless. You hear a sentence at precisely the moment you've been wrestling with a specific question. You meet someone who reflects a quality you've been trying to discover within yourself. You encounter an idea that suddenly gives language to a feeling you've carried silently for years. The event itself might be entirely ordinary, but the meaning it creates within you might not be ordinary at all. And this is why you should never underestimate the power of a seemingly small encounter with someone or something. A single conversation can expose a hidden desire you didn't know you had. A single question can challenge an entire identity you've built for years. A single moment of real honesty can change the entire direction of a life. The unexpected doesn't always arrive with dramatic music and obvious certainty attached to it. More often, it appears quietly instead. It might look insignificant at first, simply because you're still expecting something considerably larger to show up. You might be waiting for a miracle while completely overlooking the actual invitation in front of you. You might be waiting for your life to change while ignoring the small decision that would actually begin changing it right now. You might be waiting for someone to rescue you while life is quietly showing you that you're already ready to rescue yourself. This is exactly why the unexpected often comes through a door you weren't watching. You were watching instead the future you'd already imagined for yourself. Life was quietly revealing the future you hadn't yet imagined at all. But there's another reason unexpected experiences can become so transformative. They often reveal parts of your personality that have simply been waiting for the chance to express themselves. Maybe you've always considered yourself cautious until circumstances suddenly required real courage from you. Maybe you believed you were incapable of starting over until something forced you to leave behind what felt familiar. Maybe you thought you needed constant approval until you finally chose a path that nobody around you fully understood. The event itself doesn't actually create the potential within you. It reveals it instead. This is one of the genuine mysteries of psychological development. Sometimes you don't actually know who you are until life places you in a situation that demands a response from a considerably deeper part of you. A person may live for years believing they're weak until they're forced to become strong. Someone may believe they have no creativity in them until pain drives them to finally create something. Someone may believe they are destined to repeat the exact same pattern forever until one unexpected moment gives them the chance to respond differently for once. And in that particular moment, something changes, not necessarily outside first, but inside you, where you discover that you're not actually limited to the identity you've been repeating this whole time. This is the movement toward becoming more fully yourself. The gradual process of becoming increasingly who you actually are, rather than simply becoming the person your circumstances, fears, or expectations have demanded of you over the years. And sometimes an unexpected event becomes the catalyst for exactly that process. It might disturb your comfort. It might challenge your assumptions directly. It might force you to confront the real difference between the life you've been performing and the life you genuinely want to live instead. This is why not every unexpected event should be judged immediately by whether it feels pleasant in the moment. Some experiences arrive purely to give you something. Others arrive purely to reveal something. And some arrive purely to remove something that was quietly preventing you from becoming conscious in the first place. You might not understand the purpose while you're still inside the experience itself. You might only understand it much later when you look back and realize the path actually changed at a moment you almost completely dismissed at the time. So don't become so attached to the specific form of your future that you fail to recognize its considerably deeper meaning. The unexpected might not look like what you originally asked for. It might not arrive according to your own timeline. It might not come through the person, place, or opportunity you'd originally imagined for yourself. But sometimes the greatest change begins precisely because life refuses to follow the script you'd already written for it. And one day you may look back at the moment you thought was simply a detour and realize instead that it was actually the entrance to the life you'd been unconsciously preparing to live all along. But there's another part of this whole transformation that a lot of people don't expect at all. Before something truly new can actually enter your life, something hidden within you may first demand to be seen clearly. This is often the part of the journey people resist the most out of everything. You might think you're simply waiting for an opportunity, a relationship, a breakthrough, or a new chapter to begin. But underneath that particular desire, there may be an older part of you quietly asking, instead to finally be understood. The fear you keep carefully avoiding, the anger you never let yourself express out loud, the insecurity you hide behind constant perfectionism, the need for approval you pretend you no longer have at all, the grief you buried away because you believed you had to remain strong through everything. These hidden parts of yourself don't simply disappear just because you stop thinking about them consciously. They remain instead within the deeper layers of your psyche, quietly influencing your choices, your relationships, your reactions, even the kind of future you believe you actually deserve for yourself. This is exactly what makes the shadow so important to understand. The shadow isn't simply the bad part of you sitting somewhere in the dark. It contains everything you've rejected, denied, or learned was unacceptable about yourself over the years. Sometimes it genuinely contains painful qualities, yes, but sometimes it also contains your courage, your creativity, your ambition, your independence, and your own authentic voice. You may have hidden your own strength because you were taught that being strong would make other people uncomfortable around you. You may have hidden your ambition because you were afraid of being judged harshly for it. You may have hidden your sensitivity because the world once made you feel weak for having genuinely deep emotions. And so a part of you got quietly pushed into the darkness over time. But whatever gets pushed into the unconscious doesn't actually stop existing because of that. It waits there instead. And sometimes when you're approaching a genuinely new stage of life, the shadow starts appearing more visibly. This might be exactly why you suddenly feel more emotional than usual lately. You might become aware of old memories resurfacing unexpectedly. You might notice patterns in your relationships you can no longer excuse away easily. You might find yourself reacting strongly to certain people, only to later realize they touch something unresolved, sitting quietly within you. This can feel genuinely uncomfortable because the shadow very often appears through projection instead. You see something in another person that awakens a surprisingly powerful reaction inside you. Maybe their confidence irritates you more than it should. Maybe their freedom makes you genuinely uncomfortable to witness. Maybe their success creates an emotion in you that you don't really want to admit to feeling. The easy response here is to simply judge them for it. But the deeper question is considerably harder to sit with. What is this particular person actually showing me about myself right now? Maybe they're displaying a quality you've denied in yourself for years. Maybe their freedom reminds you of the life you secretly wish you had the courage to actually live. Maybe their confidence exposes the insecurity you've been quietly hiding this whole time. This doesn't mean every single reaction you have is purely projection, of course. Sometimes people genuinely behave in harmful ways, and healthy boundaries are absolutely necessary in those situations. But the psychological insight underneath still remains genuinely valuable, regardless. Strong emotional reactions can sometimes reveal real information about your own inner world that's worth paying attention to. And when something unexpected is about to enter your life, the shadow may rise up precisely because you can't carry your old patterns forward into a new experience without eventually having to confront them directly. Imagine someone who desperately wants a genuinely healthy relationship, but unconsciously believes they have to earn love by sacrificing themselves completely. They might keep attracting situations where they give everything and receive very little back in return. Then one day, they become conscious of the actual pattern for the first time. At first, this realization might feel genuinely painful to sit with. They might look back at their past and recognize how often they abandoned their own needs simply to avoid being rejected by someone. But this awareness isn't a punishment at all. It's the actual beginning of freedom instead. Because once a pattern becomes fully conscious, it no longer gets to control you in that same invisible way it used to. You can begin choosing differently from that point forward. And this is exactly why the shadow may be quietly guarding the door to your next chapter. Not because you have to become perfect before anything good can happen in your life. You don't need to eliminate every fear you have. You don't need to heal every single wound before life can move forward for you. But you do need enough awareness to recognize when the past is quietly attempting to repeat itself through the future instead. Sometimes the unexpected opportunity arrives, but your old fear tells you to reject it outright. Sometimes the right person enters your life, but your old wounds convince you that closeness is genuinely dangerous. Sometimes a new path appears clearly, but the identity you built around failure tells you that you're simply not capable of walking it. The opportunity is genuinely present, but the old self is still standing at the door, blocking the way. This is exactly why inner work matters so much here. The future doesn't simply require you to receive something new from outside. It may actually require you to stop defending the parts of yourself that were only ever created to survive an older reality that no longer applies. Clear as throat, you may have become guarded because someone once betrayed your trust badly. You may have become emotionally distant because vulnerability once caused you real pain. You may have become excessively independent because depending on others once genuinely disappointed you. These particular strategies may have protected you once at an earlier point in your life, but a strategy that protects you during one chapter can genuinely imprison you during the next one instead. And sometimes the unexpected thing entering your life isn't actually an external event at all. Sometimes it's a new relationship with yourself instead. You begin speaking honestly for once. You begin saying no without endlessly explaining yourself to everyone. You begin to stop chasing people who only value you when you're being useful to them somehow. You begin to understand that peace isn't emptiness, and solitude isn't rejection either. You begin to see that the parts of yourself you once considered weaknesses may actually contain the very qualities that make you whole. This is the beginning of real integration. You don't destroy the shadow entirely. You become conscious of it instead. You learn what it's actually been carrying this whole time. You take back the energy you once spent pretending certain parts of yourself simply didn't exist at all. And when you do this, something genuinely changes. You no longer approach the future as someone desperately waiting to be saved by whatever comes next. You approach it instead as someone who's becoming capable of meeting life with considerably greater awareness than before. So if old fears are rising up right now, don't assume you're automatically moving backward. Maybe something within you is simply asking to be seen before you're able to move forward again. Because sometimes the shadow isn't actually blocking the door to your next chapter at all. It's showing you instead what you need to finally understand before you're truly ready to walk through it. And after you begin recognizing these hidden patterns within yourself, something else starts to change too. You start understanding that the life you're waiting for may require a version of you that no longer exists anymore. This can be genuinely difficult to accept because a lot of people believe the future will simply become different while they themselves remain exactly the same. They hope for a new relationship while still carrying the exact same fears. They desire a new opportunity while still believing They're somehow unworthy of real success. They want peace while continuing to identify with the chaos they've known for years already. But life very often changes once your relationship with yourself changes first. Not because you have to become perfect somehow. Not because you have to become someone completely different. But because you have to become considerably more fully who you already are underneath everything. There's a real difference between becoming a new person entirely and becoming more conscious of the person you've always been, buried beneath the roles, expectations, fears, and adaptations you learned throughout your life so far. For years, you may have been shaped entirely by what happened to you. You learned to stay quiet because speaking honestly created conflict you couldn't handle. You learned to be strong because nobody ever came to help you when you needed it. You learned to be agreeable because rejection felt genuinely unbearable to face. You learned to expect disappointment because hope had once caused you real pain. These particular adaptations may have helped you survive at the time, but survival was never quite the same thing as actually living fully. And eventually there comes a point where the personality you created to protect yourself starts limiting the life you're actually capable of experiencing instead. This is where the deeper meaning behind this whole process starts to reveal itself. It's never about becoming extraordinary in the eyes of the world around you. It's about becoming increasingly honest with yourself instead. You begin separating your true desires from the expectations you inherited from other people. You begin recognizing the difference between your own genuine voice and the voices you've absorbed from family, society, fear, and past experience. You begin asking questions that aren't always easy to sit with. What do I actually want for myself? What am I doing? Only because I'm afraid of disappointing someone else. Which parts of my identity are genuinely mine? Which parts were only ever created as protection? And perhaps the most important question of all, who might I become if I stopped organizing my entire life around what I'm afraid of? These particular questions can change absolutely everything, because the unexpected opportunity that enters your life may not actually be valuable simply because of what it offers you materially. It may be valuable instead because of who it requires you to become in order to receive it. A new opportunity might require real courage from you. A healthy relationship might require genuine vulnerability. A meaningful path might require you to disappoint people who benefited from your old identity for years. A new beginning might require you to finally stop asking permission from your own past. And this is exactly why some people receive exactly what they once prayed for, only to discover they're not actually emotionally prepared to hold on to it. They wanted love, but they were still quietly addicted to emotional distance. They wanted success, but they were still genuinely terrified of being fully seen. They wanted freedom, but they'd become comfortable with the familiar limitations of their old life. They wanted change, but their entire identity was built around staying exactly the same. This isn't a reason for shame at all. It's an invitation to awareness instead. Because once you recognize the conflict clearly, you can begin transforming it. You can begin learning that receiving something doesn't always mean losing control over your life. You can begin understanding that vulnerability isn't actually the same thing as weakness. You can begin realizing that being genuinely seen doesn't automatically mean being rejected either. You can begin allowing yourself to experience things your former identity would have immediately pushed away out of pure habit. And slowly, your capacity for all of this expands over time. You become able to tolerate more joy without constantly waiting for disaster to follow. You become able to receive love without immediately searching for the exact moment it'll disappear on you. You become able to accept success without feeling like you have to apologize for it constantly. You become able to rest without believing your entire value depends on constant productivity. This is a genuinely profound transformation because the external world might not change immediately as a result. But your relationship with the external world absolutely changes. And once that relationship changes, entirely different choices become possible for you. You notice different people around you. You respond differently to opportunities that arise. You recognize patterns that once quietly controlled you without your awareness. You no longer confuse mere familiarity with actual destiny. You no longer mistake ordinary anxiety for genuine intuition. You no longer believe that every closed door is proof you're somehow unworthy of good things. You begin to understand instead that some doors close simply because the person you were has reached the natural end of a particular path they were on. And perhaps this is exactly why something unexpected may soon enter your life. Not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you for all your suffering. Not because you finally become worthy of receiving good things, since you were never required to earn your basic worth in the first place. But because you may finally be becoming conscious enough to recognize what's genuinely healthy, meaningful, and aligned with the person you're steadily becoming. The unexpected may have actually been near you before now. The opportunity may have appeared before too. The possibility may have existed for years already, but you simply weren't yet able to see it clearly at the time. You were still looking through the eyes of your old wounds. Now, slowly, you're learning to look through the eyes of genuine awareness instead. And this changes what you're willing to accept going forward. The old version of you may have chosen whatever felt familiar. The emerging version of you begins choosing instead whatever feels genuinely true. That's a powerful shift, because once you become someone who no longer needs to betray yourself in order to be loved, you become capable of receiving an entirely different kind of relationship. Once you no longer need to prove your worth through constant exhaustion, you become capable of receiving an entirely different kind of success. Once you no longer allow fear to make every single decision for you, you become capable of walking toward possibilities you once couldn't even imagine were available to you. So perhaps the most important preparation for whatever is coming isn't learning how to predict it accurately. It's learning instead how to become the person who can meet it without abandoning themselves in the process. Because sometimes the unexpected thing entering your life isn't only a new opportunity showing up. It's the discovery that you're finally ready to live differently by the time it actually arrives. And once you become ready to receive what you once couldn't hold, life begins to feel unexpectedly possible in ways it didn't before. And perhaps After everything you've been through, the greatest surprise isn't simply that something new is coming your way. It's that one day you may finally understand why so much of the old had to end first. There are endings we spend years trying to explain to ourselves. Why did that relationship disappear the way it did? Why did that opportunity fail, despite everything? Why did the path I believed in suddenly close on me? Why did I have to experience that particular period of loneliness, uncertainty, or disappointment at all? When you're still inside the experience itself, the ending often feels like clear evidence that life has rejected you personally. You see only what's been taken away from you. You see the empty space left behind. You see all the unanswered questions sitting there. But time has a way of revealing what raw emotion simply can't at the moment. Sometimes an ending isn't actually the conclusion of your story at all. It's the conclusion of an identity instead. You may have believed you were losing a person when in reality you were losing the version of yourself that existed around that particular person. You may have believed you were losing an opportunity when in reality you were being released from a path that no longer represented who you were becoming. You may have believed a delay was preventing your life from moving forward, when perhaps that delay was actually changing the person who would eventually walk into the future waiting ahead. This doesn't mean every painful event has some obvious purpose attached to it, or that every loss should be romanticized away. Pain is genuinely real. Grief is genuinely real. Disappointment is genuinely real too. Some experiences leave wounds that require real time, honesty, and care to heal properly. But even within pain itself, the mind can continue moving toward greater consciousness regardless. Something can end and still teach you plenty. Something can break your heart and still reveal an important truth to you. Something can leave your life entirely and still change the direction of your life forever afterward. This is exactly why the meaning of an experience isn't always visible at the exact moment it happens to you. You may be standing right in the middle of a chapter, trying to understand why the story has become so difficult, while life is quietly preparing the next page behind the scenes. And sometimes the unexpected only enters your life after you finally stopped trying to recreate what has already ended for good. This is one of the most difficult lessons to learn. You can't receive the new while continuously negotiating with the past. You can't build a genuinely different future while remaining emotionally committed to proving the old one should have worked out somehow. You can't keep standing at a closed door demanding it become the entrance to the life you now actually need. There comes a moment where you simply have to turn around, not because you've stopped caring about what came before, not because the past was meaningless to you, but because your life is still moving forward regardless. And when you finally turn, you may notice something you couldn't see while you were still looking backward the whole time. Another possibility, another direction entirely, another version of yourself waiting there. Perhaps the unexpected thing entering your life isn't something you could have recognized before now, simply because your attention was completely occupied by what had already left you behind. This is exactly why the mind often needs a period of genuine emptiness, not as punishment for anything, but as space instead. A room can't be filled with something new while every corner is still occupied by what no longer belongs there anymore. And the same is genuinely true internally as well. Sometimes you have to release the identity of the person who was always waiting around, the person who was always proving something, the person who was always trying to be chosen by someone else, the person who believed one particular outcome was the only possible form of happiness available to them. When that identity finally starts loosening its grip, you may experience real grief over it. But underneath that grief, there may also be genuine freedom waiting. You begin realizing that your life was never actually limited to one person, one opportunity, one location, one timeline, or one version of success. The future becomes considerably larger as a result. And this is exactly where the unexpected can finally be recognized clearly. Not because it arrives exactly as you originally imagined it would, but because you're no longer demanding that life repeat the exact shape of your old desires. You become more open now, more conscious, more capable of asking not only what do I want, but also what is this experience asking me to become instead. That particular question can transform absolutely everything, because sometimes the new chapter doesn't actually begin when you receive what you originally wanted. Sometimes it begins instead when you become someone who no longer needs the old thing in order to feel genuinely whole. And then, strangely, life becomes considerably less about chasing things down. You begin walking instead with greater trust in your own awareness. You begin noticing the quiet opportunities around you, the meaningful conversations, the unexpected invitations, the ideas that keep returning, the doors that open without requiring you to destroy yourself just to walk through them. You begin recognizing the difference between something that merely excites your fear and something that genuinely expands your entire life. This is the wisdom that comes from everything you've already survived up to this point. You're no longer the same person who began this particular journey. You've been changed by every ending you endured along the way, every question you faced honestly, every part of yourself you were forced to finally confront directly. And perhaps something unexpected really is about to enter your life soon. But when it does arrive, it may not feel like some dramatic reward handed down to you. It may feel strangely natural instead. You may look at it and realize the person you once were would have been genuinely unable to receive it properly. The old version of you might have run from it entirely. The old, you might have quietly sabotaged it without even realizing why. The old, you might have rejected it simply because it felt unfamiliar and strange. But now something is genuinely different. You can remain present with it instead. You can accept it without clinging too tightly. You can love without disappearing completely into another person. You can pursue something meaningful without needing it to prove your entire worth. You can begin again without pretending the past never actually happened to you. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning behind an unexpected new chapter arriving. It doesn't erase everything that came before it. It gives all of it a proper place instead. The pain becomes part of your understanding. The endings become part of your wisdom. The waiting becomes part of your patience. The confusion becomes part of your consciousness. And one day, you may look back and realize the old life never simply disappeared for nothing. It brought you instead to the threshold. It brought you to the exact moment when you could finally recognize what was waiting for you just beyond it. So don't be afraid of the space between what has already ended and what hasn't fully begun yet. Something may be quietly changing right now. Something may be forming beyond your current understanding of things. And when it finally arrives, you may finally see that the greatest surprise was never simply what entered your life. It was who you had already become by the time it did.